This presentation is recorded in conformity with the CSULB Academic Technology Initiative. Slide 1. Controversy 8. Should age or need be the basis for entitlement? Introduction. Not so long ago, the picture of older adults was depicted by a vulnerable, sad, and poor older citizen. But today, we know that economic conditions in the United States have caused older Americans to see significant increases in financial inequality over the past 3 decades. Slide 2. This slide talks about generational equity. When we speak about generation, 2 different meanings of generation are defined. 1. Generation as an age-specific group such as older adults or children under age 18, or 2. Generation as a historical cohort consisting of a group of people born in the same year or in a certain period. For example, those who experienced the Great Depression or World War II. Now, generational equity, it refers to the concept that different generations should be treated in similar ways and should have similar opportunities. To understand generational equity debates, we need to look at 4 different trends. 1. We'll need to formulate questions about the allocation of resources between older adults and children. 2. To raise concerns about large government deficits. 3. To understand the current controversies over rationing healthcare resources. And 4. To address questions about the fairness of how Social Security is financed. Slide 3 refers to poverty among the old and defines supplemental security income. Over the past 30 years, there has been a large reduction in poverty rates among the older adults in the United States. Although the most gains in income for people were in the 1960s and 1970s, concentration of wealth among older people also increased. By 2010, the top 20% accounted for 62% of total annuitized value of wealth. Overall, inequality within each birth group increased as its members moved from early to mid to later life. The sharpest increases occurred in the groups that reached age 65 plus by 2010, those born generally during the Great Depression and World War II, and those reaching ages 55 to 64 in 2010, leading-edge baby boomers. Although these groups experienced a lower inequality environment during their earlier working years, as they moved into the middle and later life in this higher inequality environment, their financial inequality increased sharply. But there are still elders who live in poverty. In 2011, the below poverty rate for older adults comprised 3.6 million older citizens. The poverty rate is increased among older adults due to the out-of-pocket medical expenses. The near poverty rate among older adults shows fluctuations based on how we look at it. When Medicare is taken into account, the poverty rate drops, or if we ignore the Social Security checks or cash transfer governmental programs like supplemental security income, will increase the poverty rate to a 44% of older Americans. We all heard about Social Security, but let's look for a second on what the supplemental security income is. This program is a cash benefit program for the older, poor, blind, and disabled. It is a means-tested program, and it's only available if your income and assets fall below a desired range. It is important to mention about these governmental programs because there is the term of tweeners when people are caught between the economically insecure lower middle class older adults. So they are not well off economically, but they are not poor enough to poor enough to qualify for supplemental security income program we just defined. Slide 4. This slide talks about poverty among children and young people. Believe it or not, the international comparison shows that U.S. poverty rates among children are higher than every other industrial nation in the world. This high poverty rate may be caused by family structure, unemployment, and/or declining end wages. Some people also blame the declining well-being of children on the voting power of older adults. The reality is that families with children today form a smaller part of the electorate than in the past. Taxation and power, slide 5. The U.S. tax system has far-reaching impacts on different age groups and cohorts. Many tax breaks or tax expenditure go disproportionately to older people with higher incomes. For example, the aged poor gets only 2% of the benefits from tax breaks. One method to analyze generational equity is known as generational accounting, which analyzes how government tax and spending policies affect different cohorts. This approach adds up all the taxes paid to federal, state, and local governments over a lifetime, then subtracts benefits received such as Social Security, Medicare, and schooling. Although the generational accounting approach provides a way of thinking about the long-range impact of budget decisions made today, there are some who will critique this approach, understand that future projections about population or economy are filled with uncertainty. The bottom line is that we must distinguish between the notion of conflict between generations and competition for different public programs. Slide 6. The least advantaged older adults. There are some few tough questions we need to ask when we think about helping the vulnerable older adults. Who do you think should receive benefits, or how government should target its resources to those most in need? What the criteria should be? For finding answers, we first need to look at how we define least advantaged among older adults. Possible answers include the following. Should we consider the entire older population? Or just people above a certain age, or maybe just elders in minority ethnic groups. What about older women? Should we consider only them, or only older adults living in rural or inner cities areas? And should we consider only the physically or mentally frail, or those older people who are vulnerable to abuse or neglect? So these are really tough questions to ask. Slide 8 continues on the topic of the least advantaged older adult. Today, there are many people in their 60s and 70s who are healthy and active. The so-called elderly cause some people to argue that disability and frailty, not chronological age, should be the basis of access to services. But the aged poor present multiple disadvantages of the aged, regardless of gender or ethnicity. When we look at one individual's disadvantage over a life course, we will address the socioeconomic status, which is a term used by sociologists to describe what is often known as social class. But socioeconomic status shows the structural inequality in the distribution of power and wealth among older adults. When there is lower socioeconomic status over the life course of an individual, it perpetuates the cumulative disadvantage. which means if you were near the poverty line all of your life, while in your elder years you will most likely fall under the poverty line due to the interlocking of disadvantageous circumstances. Next slide, the targeting debate. There are strong opinions how universal governmental programs such as Older American Act can properly give preference to some needy groups. Some will say funds should be open to all. Others will consider that funds will be well spent if will be shared based on one's need. One approach used to share the funds is called cost sharing. This approach combines elements of both means testing and taxation. So taking into consideration the Older Americans Act, which directs the Aging Service Network to target its services to individuals with the greatest economic or social needs, with particular attention to low-income minority individuals. But there is still debate over how universal programs such as Older Americans Act and Social Security can properly give preference to some needy groups. Slide 9. This slide will talk about growing older. It's the reading toward the end of our chapter, Controversy 8. So in this reading, the author makes strong recommendation about generational equity in growing older. Think about these recommendations and try also to see how you would respond to them. Slide 10 is about reading 35. Will America grow up before it grows old? Peterson asks about America growing up if before grows old. So what is he referring in such question? From his perspective of generational equity, what will the indicators that America has grown up will be? Slide 11, reading 36. Generational equity and the new victim blaming. Winkler argues in here that generational equity it's from a critical standpoint and considers elements as socially constructed and dangerous arguments. What would you say the central points in her arguments are? And last slide, reading 37, the generational equity debate. The authors in here contrast the debate between generational equity frame and the generational interdependence frame. What stance do you take and why? So that is all for today. Have a great day and email me if you have questions. Thank you.